The sky over Cedar Creek blazed crimson, the air thick with the acrid scent of ash, but veteran Owen and his dog Ash couldn't tear their gaze from the last house on the evacuation route. Amid the urgent orders, it stood as the lone bastion of defiance. As they approached, an unbelievable sight unfolded on the porch. A small, frail, elderly woman clutched a hunting rifle, her eyes not meeting theirs but staring through them into a despair deeper than the inferno roaring behind her. Owen knew instantly this wasn't madness, but an oath. An oath she was prepared to die defending. What lay hidden behind that door, more precious than life itself? Please support us by subscribing to the channel. Where are you listening to this story from? The sky over Cedar Creek wasn't blue or even gray. It was a bruised, angry orange. Ash, fine as dust, rained down from the heavens, coating every surface in a ghostly film and leaving the bitter taste of smoke on the tongue. The air was thick, with a symphony of chaos, the relentless wail of sirens blending with the distant, guttural roar of a monster made of flame. Through this apocalyptic haze, a man and his dog moved with a quiet purpose. Owen was a man in his 40s, with the lean, resilient build of someone whose life had been spent in motion. His short brown hair was dusted with silver at the temples, and his kind face was etched with lines of focus. He wore a simple plaid shirt of navy and beige over a gray t-shirt, the fabric worn soft from use, tucked into faded denim jeans and a pair of sturdy work boots. At his side, trotting with an unnerving calm, was Ash. The 5-year-old German shepherd's thick coat was a striking mix of gray and white, and his intelligent eyes missed nothing. He was Owen's post-service support animal, a steady anchor in a world that often felt adrift. Together, they went from door to door, their presence a small island of calm in the frantic sea of evacuation. An exhausted firefighter with a soot-streaked face jogged over to them, gesturing with his thumb towards the end of the street. "Owen, we've got a problem," he said, his voice strained. "Last house on the left, the Miller place. She won't budge. Got a shotgun, and isn't afraid to point it." Owen nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the lone house standing defiantly at the edge of the woods. He gave Ash's neck a reassuring scratch. "We'll handle it." As they approached, the scene came into sharp focus. A woman, small and frail with wispy white hair, stood on her porch. She was maybe 70 years old, but the hunting rifle she held looked like a natural extension of her arms. Her face wasn't crazed or angry. It was a mask of profound, heartbreaking despair. She was guarding her home not from people but from fate itself. Owen stopped at the edge of the lawn, keeping a respectful distance. He raised his hands slowly to show they were empty. "Ma'am?" he began, his voice calm and even. "My name is Owen, and this is Ash. We're with the volunteer evacuation team. You need to come with us. The fire is moving fast." Eleanor Miller did not answer. Her eyes, pale blue and watery, stared right through him, fixed on a point in the distance that only she could see. The heat from the approaching inferno was a physical presence now, a wave that washed over them, promising destruction. The standoff was absolute. A silent battle of wills waged on the doorstep of a burning world, with a clock that was measured not in minutes, but in the terrifying advance of the flames. Time stretched thin in the space between the man and the woman. The world was a roar of heat and sound, but on the lawn of the Miller house there was only a heavy, brittle silence. Owen stood his ground, his training telling him that patience was his only tool. Any sudden movement, any sharp command, would shatter the fragile standoff and lose him his only chance. He felt a soft nudge against his leg and glanced down. Ash was looking up at him, his intelligent eyes filled with an understanding that went beyond human words. Owen gave the slightest nod, a silent release. With the leash slack, Ash walked forward. He did not bark or bound, his movements were slow and deliberate. He mounted the wooden steps to the porch one by one, each footfall soft and respectful. Stopping a few feet from the woman, he let out a low, gentle whimper, a sound not of distress, but of pure empathy. Then, He lowered himself to the weathered planks of the porch, tucking his paws beneath him and resting his great head, his gaze never once leaving Eleanor Miller's face. He offered no threat, only a shared and silent sorrow. That simple, profound act of canine compassion was the key. The rigid line of Eleanor's shoulders softened. The barrel of the shotgun, held so tightly, dipped towards the floor. Her gaze, which had been lost in a fiery horizon of grief, finally fell to the gentle creature at her feet. For a long moment, she just watched him. Then, her eyes traveled up the leash to the man who held it. She truly looked at Owen for the first time, her focus no longer blurred by desperation. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the familiar set of his jaw. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, a ghost of a memory from a lifetime ago. "Miller's boy," she whispered, her voice raspy. You were one of Sergeant Miller's boys." Owen's heart clenched. "Yes, ma'am. He was my sergeant. He taught me everything." The wall of defiance crumbled completely. The shotgun was lowered, its weight now too much to bear. With a weary sigh, Eleanor turned and pushed open the front door. "Come inside," she said, the words a quiet surrender. The house was immaculate, a time capsule of a long and loving life. Without another word, she led Owen through the living room, past portraits and memories, and down a narrow set of stairs into the cool, dark basement. There, against the far stone wall, stood a heavy, old-fashioned iron safe. Eleanor placed a trembling hand upon its cold steel door. "His whole life's work is in there," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My husband's, a history of his unit. The letters, the diaries, the photographs, everything. It's the soul of those men, and it's locked in there." Down in the cool stillness of the basement, the world outside felt both distant and terrifyingly close. A deafening crack echoed from above as a nearby pine tree surrendered to the flames, and the old house groaned in protest. The stone walls around them, once a barrier against the summer heat, now radiated a steady, ominous warmth. The fire was no longer a distant threat on the horizon, it was at their door. Owen looked from the heavy iron safe back to Eleanor, whose composure was finally beginning to crumble. Her breath hitched, and a single, ragged sob escaped her lips. "I can't remember," she whispered, the words catching in her throat as tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "The combination. When the evacuation order came, my mind it went blank. It's gone, and I can't get it back." A wave of helplessness washed over Owen, but his training kicked in, pushing back the despair. "It's all right, Eleanor. We'll figure it out," he said, his voice more confident than he felt. He knelt before the safe, his fingers finding the cold, grooved dial. "Let's think. What would the sergeant have used? Your anniversary?" Eleanor provided the date, her voice trembling. Owen carefully turned the dial, listening to the soft clicks of the tumblers, his heart pounding with a desperate hope. Right, left, right. He gripped the handle and pulled. Nothing. The lock held firm. "Okay," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. "How about his birthday?" Again, he spun the dial. Again, the handle refused to yield. They tried her birthday, the year he enlisted, the date of his honorable discharge. Each attempt ended with the same solid, unforgiving thud of failure. The hope in the small basement dwindled with each failed attempt, replaced by the suffocating certainty that time was running out. Owen sat back on his heels, the roar of the fire seeming to mock their efforts. Eleanor buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a moment, they were completely defeated. And then, a new sound cut through the noise. A sharp, insistent bark from upstairs. Owen glanced at the ceiling, assuming Ash was simply frightened by the growing chaos. But the barking continued, sharp and rhythmic, not the frantic sound of a scared animal. It was a summons, it was insistent, and it had a purpose. It stopped, then started again, more urgent this time. Owen's brow furrowed, his soldier's instincts telling him this was something more than just fear. "Stay here," Owen said to Eleanor, his voice urgent. "I'll be right back." He trusted the instinct he saw in his dog's eyes more than he trusted the failing logic in his own mind. He took the basement stairs 2 at a time, emerging into a hallway that was now thick with acrid smoke. Ash was waiting for him, a tense silhouette in the eerie orange glow filtering through the windows. The German shepherd let out a single, sharp bark and turned, leading the way with an unwavering confidence. He led Owen to a room at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. It was Sergeant Miller's study, a sanctuary left untouched by time, though now violated by the invading smoke. Dust-covered shelves were crammed with books on military history, framed medals hung on the walls, and rolled-up maps sat in a tall wicker basket. It was the room of a man who lived with ghosts and honored their memory. Ash ignored it all. He went directly to a heavy oak desk that sat beneath the window, a silent sentinel guarding decades of history. He began nudging one of the bottom drawers with his nose, whining with a low, insistent rumble. "Here, boy? You think it's in here?" Owen pulled the drawer open, his hope flickering. It slid out with a soft groan, revealing an almost empty space. A couple of dried-up pens and a single tarnished paperclip. His shoulders slumped. It was a dead end. But as he went to push the drawer closed, Ash became more agitated. He nudged Owen's hand away and then did something remarkable. He lifted his front paw and deliberately scratched at the smooth wooden bottom of the open drawer, looking up at Owen with pleading eyes. Understanding dawned on Owen. It wasn't what was in the drawer, it was the drawer itself. He gripped the sides and pulled it completely free from the desk. It was surprisingly light. He turned it over in his hands. His breath caught in his throat. Taped securely to the underside, yellowed and curling at the edges, was an old black and white photograph. It showed a company of young soldiers, their faces a mixture of pride and youthful bravado, squinting against a long-ago Sunday, and there, standing in the very center of the group, looking every bit the leader he was born to be, was a young, smiling Sergeant Miller. Owen stared at the photograph, his world narrowing to the faded image in his hands. His thumb brushed against the corner of the paper, revealing a line of elegant, handwritten script he hadn't noticed at first. He squinted, holding it closer to the dim, smoky light. "Utah Beach, the 6th of June, 2044, he read aloud, his voice a low murmur. And underneath, a quote that sent a shiver down his spine, "We few, we happy few." It was a lightning strike of understanding, a soldier's code. It was never about one man, it was about the unit. The birthdays and anniversaries were for the family he came home to, but the combination that guarded his life's work, that was for the family he had fought with. It wasn't personal. It was a legacy. "Eleanor!" he yelled, already turning and running from the room, the drawer clutched in his hand. He raced down the stairs, Ash's paws thudding on the steps right behind him. He burst into the basement to find Eleanor exactly where he had left her, a statue of despair. He thrust the photo towards her. "Look," he said, his voice breathless with excitement. It was never about him, it was about them. The 29th Infantry. The date isn't his birthday, Eleanor. It's the birthday of his brotherhood. Hope dawned in her eyes as she looked from the photo to Owen's determined face. He knelt before the safe one last time, his fingers moving with newfound certainty. He dialed the combination born of fire and history. 2, 9, 6, 6, 4, 4. In the roaring silence, he paused, then pulled the handle. There was no resistance. A heavy, satisfying clunk echoed in the small room as the decades-old bolts retracted. The iron door swung open with a low groan. The air that drifted out smelled not of smoke, but of old paper, leather, and time itself. Inside, perfectly preserved from the chaos of the world, were neat stacks of journals bound in leather, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, and albums filled with priceless photographs. The soul of a generation sat waiting in the darkness. Tears of pure relief streamed down Eleanor's face. Owen felt a profound reverence well up inside him, a connection to the man he had so admired. Their moment of quiet victory was shattered by a loud crash from the floor above, followed by the terrifying sizzle of embers landing on the roof. The fire was here. Snapping back to reality, Owen grabbed a large metal footlocker that sat beside the safe. Working as a team, they began to carefully but quickly transfer the precious contents, their hands brushing in a shared, frantic purpose. As the last journal was placed inside, Owen slammed the lid shut and clicked the latches closed, securing a lifetime of memories just as their world began to burn. The moment the latches clicked shut, the world above them gave a final tortured groan. A section of the ceiling collapsed, and a thick, impenetrable curtain of black smoke instantly swallowed the basement stairs. They were trapped. For a heart-stopping second, panic seized Owen. The way out was gone. But before fear could take root, Ash sprang into action. He whined sharply, pressing his body against Eleanor's legs before nudging Owen's hand insistently, urging him away from the stairs and deeper into the basement. Owen understood. He hoisted the heavy metal box. "Stay with me, Eleanor," he commanded gently, taking her arm. "Trust him." What followed was a blind pilgrimage through a dying house. Guided only by the pressure of Ash's body and his low, encouraging whines, they navigated a world of pure chaos. The heat was immense, the air so thick with smoke it felt solid, and the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass was all around them. Ash led them to a small utility door at the far end of the basement they hadn't noticed before. Owen threw his shoulder against it, and it burst open into the backyard. They stumbled out into the night, falling to their knees and gasping for air that, while still smoky, was blessedly clear. Behind them, a deafening roar ripped through the night as the main roof collapsed in on itself, sending a volcano of sparks and embers towards the blood-orange sky. They scrambled to a safe distance at the edge of the property line and watched. The house that had stood for generations, the home that held a lifetime of memories, was now a funeral pyre, being consumed by the relentless flames. But as Owen looked at Eleanor, he saw no tragedy in her eyes. She clutched the metal box to her chest as if it were a living thing. Tears carved clean lines through the soot on her cheeks, but a small, gentle smile touched her lips. She had lost her home, but she had saved its soul. Owen placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We saved them, Eleanor," he said softly. "The sergeant's men, they're safe." She could only nod, her heart too full for words. Ash came and sat at their feet, leaning his weight against them both, a quiet and steadfast guardian. The three of them stood there for a long time, a veteran, a widow, and a hero dog, silhouetted against the destructive beauty of the fire. They were three survivors guarding a priceless treasure, waiting together in the desolate landscape for the smoke to clear and for the promise of a new dawn. In the end, a house is made of wood and nails, but a home is built from the memories we cherish and the bonds we refuse to let break. The greatest legacies are not the things we own, but the love and loyalty we share, sometimes saved for us by the quiet courage of a four-legged hero. If the story of Owen, Eleanor, and the incredible Ash touched your heart, we would be so grateful if you let us know by leaving a like or sharing your thoughts in the comments below. To continue celebrating these powerful connections, please consider subscribing to Voice of Paws. The journey doesn't have to end here, as another story of hope is waiting for you right on the screen.